My name is Lonnie Douglas. I am with the Eugene Springfield Solidarity Network. I'm here with Sarah Pictionary, who is with the Solidarity Action Network, which is 501c3 associated with ESSN. Um, and we are here today with Sandra Bishop, who is running for County Commissioner for South Eugene. We want to be very clear that these interviews that we are doing are not an endorsement of any candidate. They're simply a way for the public to be able to engage, learn a little bit about the candidate, especially with the COVID crisis where these candidates are not able to get out into the community and knock on doors. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to give Sandra about 3 to 4 minutes to go ahead and let you know who she is and why she's running. Sandra, why don't you go ahead and take it?
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, great, thanks. I'm gonna time myself just so I don't lose track completely. I really want to thank you, Lonnie and Sarah, for putting this together, and I'm sure there are other people in the background that helped with this. This is critically important. I'm glad this is not an endorsement. The endorsement game is not playing well. Politics as usual is not where we need to be right now. So I really appreciate the Solidarity Network giving this platform for us candidates to really show what we're all about so people can really see the difference in the candidates. So my name is Sandra Bishop, and I'm running for Lane County Commission in the South Eugene District 3. This is pretty much all of Eugene. It goes from the river in Whitaker up to 50th and Willamette, goes out as far west as Oak Patch and areas, and also has a little bit of a section that has a residential section across the river. The only place across the river is around Autzen Stadium. The rest of it is downtown Eugene, west side, university. So this is the heart of the Eugene area here. So I think we need to quit pretending that it doesn't take experience to run the county government. So I have experience as an elected official. I was on EWEB for 10 years. And the main reason that I'm running at this time is because I want to put that experience to work. I was on EWEB for 10 years. I was elected 3 different times. For 2 terms, I represented Westside and Whitaker. And then the 3rd time I ran, I represented, that was at large Eugene, but it also meant representing the customer owners up the McKenzie River. So I've also had 25 or more years of experience working with the state legislature. I know how the government systems work. I know how to get things done. I work very collaboratively, and I'm able to cross over the barriers. No one's able to pigeonhole me, so I've had a very interesting life because professionally, I have always had clients that I was advocating for who were small businesses or business associations trying to get something done before the state legislature, but I've also always had public interest groups at the same time. So that makes it impossible for the partisan politicians to be able to pigeonhole you. So it's been very useful. So one of the things that got me into this race was realizing that we are really at a critical time for our society. And I'll talk more about my accomplishments on EWEB later, but I want to first read you something that motivated me to get into this race. This was a speech that was given as a high school graduation speech by a young friend of mine. Her name is Sarah Hewitt, and she was graduating last June 2019 from Sweet Home High School. And here's what she said. Today, we celebrate our achievements from the last 4 years, but I want to focus on what we need to accomplish in the next 11 years. That's how long climate scientists have given us, 11 years, to avoid catastrophic climate change. It's already damaging our homes, our health, our safety, and our happiness. We won't let it take our future too. Our diplomas may say class 2019, but marked in history, we are the class of zero. Zero emissions, zero excuses, zero time to waste. Across the country, our class stands 7.5 million strong. And in unity, we are giving 2020 political candidates a choice. Here's a plan, have a plan to get zero emissions, get to zero emissions or get zero of our votes. Together, we have the power to solve the climate crisis. Every student, every parent, every teacher, every leader. The future is in our hands. This is someone that I've watched grow up since she was a child, and here she is. And it's now 10 years, it's a year later. And so the climate chaos that we're in is the water that we swim in, like a fish swims in water. So everything has to be taken into consideration of what is going on a global scale, whether it's a global pandemic, whether it's catastrophic wildfires. We're going to have to deal with all these things. I have that experience to know how government works. This is not the time to turn county government over to someone who's politically correct but inexperienced. So I have been an activist for many, many years, and I have seen achievement of many things in the community. But I want to talk a little bit about the eWeb achievements before I take too much of the time here. While I was on the eWeb board, many projects that took years, 10 to 12 years development, came to fruition because I pushed the issue with a very diverse board of 5 members. We finally extended fiber optics into the downtown core. That was one of the big projects that they're now able to build out from those dark fibers. And that took years of business planning to get to that point. We also, the time I was on the board, the last meeting that I attended, I forced a vote on moving industrial operations off the riverfront property. So now we have that riverfront property ready to be used by the public again. It's been 100 years in industrial use. And that did not take a couple of quick meetings and everybody in agreement. That took many years of negotiating to get that through. And now, for the first time in 100 years, we have green grass growing on that property. It's ready for a mixed-use dynamic development when things open up again. And I'm responsible for facilitating building green generation projects all over the Northwest, whether it's geothermal, solar, wind. eWeb was a champion at going out and working in other communities to build those small projects. So that's just a few of the examples. And then locally, going way back, I started the first groups of using schools during the evenings for people in the community, the old community school programs, Growers Market, one of the first food buying co-ops. So there's a lot of things that I've done. And now the county needs someone. I am the right person at the right time to step in and set the pace to take over where Pete Sorensen's leaving off on the county board. So thank you, and I look forward to questions.
Cool.
Thanks, Sandra. I hear your cat in the background.
Sorry about that. He really wants in here.
Maybe be able to communicate with my creatures to keep it down. Hi, kitty. So we had sent over a couple of questions to the candidates ahead of time, and I'm just going to go ahead and start with the first question.
Okay, that'd be good.
The pandemic has brought to light a number of social and economic community vulnerabilities, which to a small degree have been addressed with necessary innovations like free public transportation and temporary camp areas for the most vulnerable with assisting services. Do you support these programs? Will you support or oppose expanding or at least resisting the expected cutting back of these services and a return to the status quo?
Very good question. Complex, very good. I want to just say, to frame it a little bit, it is incredible that it took a pandemic for us to finally start reaching out and providing the absolutely essential, necessary services to people who are on the streets. I'm going to let the cat in because he's yowling. Hold on. Come on, you win. Come on.
Just watch out for your keyboard.
Yeah, really. Yeah, no, he won't get anywhere near there. He's a rescue cat, so he's pretty reclusive usually. But it's just unfortunate that it's taken a pandemic for us to really provide these kind of services. I've been visiting some of the camp spaces that have been set up behind chain link fences for people. I believe they're set up in the parks, and the ones I've been to have been set up by Whitebird. And I've got some questions into the county right now about, you know, how are the people chosen for these spots? And apparently they're all tested before they're allowed to camp in close proximity. So, you know, but we have to find a way to fold these people back into a meaningful society. And what that means is, oh, excuse me. What that means is we have to stop pretending. We have to look at reality as it actually is. And that's something that political correctness will not get you there. There's too much lip service. There's too many slogans. There's too many plans. We have to make sure the county money is looked at before it's dispersed to provide some of these services. Some of the county money has to be freed up away from the very large organizations, and it has to be divvied up among small providers of essential services. So one of the things that I really want to ramp up, if I am in there as the next commissioner, is the auditing, performance auditing function of the county is severely underused. And we have to look at it. We have to have more accountability for how much money is being spent where. And we have to have a more centralized approach. At least we have to centralize what information is available for what services are available. Not another layer of bureaucracy, but a true centralization of resource information. And we have a start on that. That's doing pretty good. It has to be improved on.
Lonnie, you're muted.
Had to unmute there for a second. Sorry, had to find that unmute button. Outstanding. You know, follow up to that. I mean, we talk about. I mean, I know the city's doing a lot. The county, you know, is doing some as well. It's obvious that we have just a little follow up to it. You know, a lot of challenges and a lot to do to help deal with our unhoused problem in our community, which is, you know, one of the worst in the country for a city our size. But how would you, do you have any proposals or any ideas on how we can generate revenue to address that problem or that issue? I mean, unfortunately, shelters cost money, services cost money, and with this pandemic, we're looking at, you know, maybe having some real challenges finding revenue, even more so than now.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I'm going to take a little bit of a tack on it, tack into the wind here to get there. One of the things we need to do is we need to make sure that all of the county assets in the way of finances are invested locally. We need to create a circular economy, just as you create a circular recycling environment. You need to do that with your local economy. One of the things that is really needed here is we need to find a way to establish shelters and camps for people who are unhoused or homeless at this point that are on farmland. And we need to allow those people to work if they're able and willing to work. What we have done, and I think one of the reasons we have such a huge, outstanding, unacceptable, but the reality is we have the highest per capita homelessness rate in the nation. There is no excuse for that. We have to do things differently. We have taken away people's dignity. Some of the service provision is not allowing those people to rest and become productive and become part of their own existence. They are being put into situations where they're beholden. We need to let those people regain their personal power and their dignity. And one way to do it is set up situations that people can come into a shelter or come into a camping space where they can rest up for 3 days, have a safe place to sleep for 3 days, have 3 meals a day for 3 days. And after that, then they can come and be part of making the place function properly. So we've got to find ways. If I were out on the street, you would not see me going into a shelter at the fairgrounds in one big building with a lot of other people. That's crazy. We've got to have a way for people to be able to have places where they can go and they can garden, they can grow food, and that is going to feed into the economics of it, that they're going to be able to cut down on the cost of a shelter like that. I had a man who was camping pretty close to where I'm living, and he got rousted out, and he said, really? We're in the middle of a pandemic and I can't camp out? And so we have to find alternative ways to stop the traditional we can't have only the traditional way of providing services. We have to make sure that there are other options. And they're simple. They're so common sense that nobody is dealing with them except isolated, except for isolated individuals who are going out on the street providing services. So I want to make sure that some of the county resources go for those kind of smaller service providers. If someone's just going out to find out, does everyone have a pair of shoes? That ought to be funded by the county. All of our money doesn't need to go through corporate providers. I didn't answer your question about the revenue. We have to find a way. We have to find a way to put very low impact taxes on corporations based on ability to pay. A corporation, a large company, is not going to miss a point whatever percentage put on their gains. We have to tap into those gains. They have to be brought into the mix because they are an integral, I'm talking about corporations, talking about companies, they are an integral part of our community and what makes it work. And I've talked to a lot of owners who said, I would gladly put a small percentage forward for the county for programs.
Okay. All right, let me move us on to the next question, and then Sarah can take the follow-up for it if she has one. One of the primary functions of county government is to protect the public health and safety. Some people feel that the present pandemic is just a dress rehearsal for what's coming next. What's your plan to protect the public's health, and how would you communicate that plan to the public?
I think that's a very fair assessment and a very accurate assessment to say that we can look at this as a bit of a rehearsal. And you can't get much more real than this. This is a full dress rehearsal. The county is actually doing an excellent job. I think of all the local government jurisdictions in the state, Lane County is one of the better prepared and one of the best employed or deployed, I should say, out there. So we have Dr. Ludke and a very solid structure in the provision of health services. And I think that one of the things that's happened in this pandemic is people are starting to realize, oh, I didn't know that the county had these kind of services. The county has an enormous coverage of both physical and mental health services, and a lot of preventative things. So they were set up and ready, and they've done an excellent job in dealing with this pandemic. So the plan to protect the public health is already in place at the county. And I think that's one of the things that I have the experience to understand how and when to empower employees who are professionals to really get things done. And as far as communicating it to the public, that is a challenge these days, with every one of us as an individual getting their news from some various sources. I mean, I tend to look at the coronavirus, daily reports from our local county health people, to get the facts. So, I'm not sure how much you want to go in depth about communications, but it is a critical piece. But the communications is there. It's a matter of whether people have the desire to actually hear the facts, or whether they'd be rather chatting on devices about whether this is a conspiracy or not. But yeah, the county health is doing just an incredible job at trying to spread themselves thin enough that they can keep things flowing in a way that is supportive of people's health. And so I think they're doing a good job. And of course, the challenge is going to be, how is that funded in the future? This pandemic could very well bankrupt the county. And so we need to be looking at that. And I have been looking at those economic things as well.
Thanks, Sandra. I wanted to follow up a little bit about the crisis as it stands now. I appreciate looking forward, but I'm wondering, what role do you see the county playing in protecting working class folks with things like hazard pay? Do you see that the county plays any role in establishing those sorts of requirements of employers, or some sort of collaboration with the state to make sure that people who are out there risking their lives making less than a livable wage are getting pay that represents that risk? And again, what role do you think the county could play in really pushing for something like that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think that we have to do everything that we possibly can to narrow the inequality gap. There is such a huge inequality gap, and I don't think people realized it until this pandemic hit and all of our small businesses were shut down. And a lot of people realized, oh, wait a minute, my whole life is based on the convenience of these small businesses. And they had never thought about what those wage workers were actually making. And the fact that some of them, a lot of us are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. So I think the role that the county can play is to keep the pressure on. I don't know that the county has enough depth of authority or jurisdiction to set things like wages. I think it's kind of a little foolish to think in isolation, so that county could do this or the city could do this. A more effective way is to work with the state, work with the feds. That's why I'm running for county commissioner, because I already have a lot of those relationships. I have come up for years working in the legislature with people that are now our representatives in Congress. I know still keep in contact with a lot of the state legislators. And when you work in conjunction with the other levels of government, you're more likely to get things done. So I think that's where we've got to concentrate. And I will not let up on just continuing to push out and educate people about the inequality gap. We have an incredible problem, not only with low wages, but we have to find ways for people who are in asset poverty to gain assets. And I have some specific plans that there's other cities that are doing this, where they're allowing people to come together to invest small amounts of money and end up investing in small commercial projects or something, so they can build some equity. One of the Square One Housing is doing it with tiny homes, where the people, $50 a month goes into equity, things like that. So we've got to use those programs at the small level and at the larger countywide level.
Thanks, Sandra. Lonnie, do you have any other follow-ups, or should I move on to number 3? Okay. So for the third question, and we are kind of strapped for time, is that right?
Yeah, we're running out of time. I'll make it short.
5 minutes, you think?
Yeah.
Okay. In normal times, and especially now, the people's only avenue to the ballot box is through ballot petition initiatives. The Lane County Commissioners have been very resistant to bring the people's qualifying ballot initiatives to a vote. What will you do to make it easier for the people's voice to be heard?
The way I'll make it easier for the people's voice to be heard is to listen to them when they come to the county commissioners. The county commissioners should be taking up these issues so that the public is not forced to try to put things on the ballot. I know a lot about the initiative referendum process in Oregon, and there are legal issues that would not allow an elected official to push forth a citizen's ballot when their attorneys are telling them that they've done the review and that it's not a, quote, legally responsible thing to do. So that was the real problem there. It wasn't the substance of the issue, but we need to get in front of it, not behind it. There's no excuse for the commissioners to have not listened to the people and worked with them from the very beginning. And that's the kind of commitment I'm making, to work with people when they come forward, not to put them off and force them to have to think that the ballot initiative is the only way to address their issues.
Always takes me a minute to find that unmute button. It's smaller than I would like. All right.
We like to see mouth moving, Lonnie.
So, I don't really have a follow-up for necessarily for that one. I am going to move us on just to number 4, because we do have time-wise. So as we're approaching the wildfire season here for 2020, the virus pandemic is going to make it hard to either recruit firefighters. There's a lot of issues with, base camps for firefighters are very crowded, things like that. A lot of time I know it's the state that deals with that, but it's going to affect us directly here in Lane County. Is there any plan, or do you have any insights into how you would try to work with the state to manage the firefighting resources and keep residents and properties safe?
That's a very good question, complicated question. There's one premise that I'm not sure is holding true, and that is that it'll be hard to recruit firefighters. So many people are out of work that I know a lot of people are going back to firefighting, and they're experienced at it, but they don't have the other options out there. So I think that this again comes to the point of knowing how to interact with other jurisdictions and other governmental authorities. And I think the most important thing is that these camps will be set up as best they can, but it is difficult to keep social distance when you're feeding large groups of people. They're going to be in individual tents when they're camping, but what's going to be critically important is that testing is done. And testing is going to for COVID-19 is going to have to be done as a screening device for all firefighters. And there's going to have to be trusted leaders on site who can have a relationship with those individuals working so that they are willing to come forward and say, I'm feeling ill, because we can't afford to have an outbreak of COVID-19 in a fire camp. And I think because people are so desperate for work that we're going to have to really give them more services. And those services, and it's going to be predicated on how well we can coordinate with other providers, not providers, but other jurisdictions, because there's a hierarchy. When you're fighting a fire, you have to have it has to be clear who calls the shots. And that stuff's going to have to be in writing. Somebody's going to have the authority to call a camp, to break up a camp, to call the people out so that people are not being infected and their health is not being put in jeopardy because they're providing life-saving firefighting services for others. So, I don't mean to sound mushy there. I'm just saying it's going to take a lot of coordination between all the levels of involvement in firefighting. And I've got the skills to make sure that that's done properly.
Cool. All right. Well, do you have a follow-up or anything for that, Sarah? Question? No. All right. Well, I mean, we're at time. So Sandra, I wanted to thank you for coming. Again, I wanted to let people know, this is not an endorsement. These interviews are not an endorsement of any particular candidate. ESSN is nonpartisan, and so is SAN. Our role is to help educate voters and help them to get to know the candidates better. Sandra, do you have a website or a Facebook page that you would like people to be able to go to learn more about you?
Yes, it's www.bishop2020, 020, so bishop2020 lanecounty.com.
All right.
All right. Thank
Excellent.
you very
So
much
we're going to
for
go
doing
ahead.
that.
Well, no problem. We're going to go ahead and end our live stream. Again, thank you very much for coming. It was good to have you here. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.